My name is Allison Felis, and this is I'll Follow You, a podcast featuring light and lively conversations about film, music, and creative culture, coming to you from the People's Republic of Rogers Park on the far northeast side of Chicago. I know that before every episode, I always say how delighted I am to be in conversation with that week's interviewee, but truly, I always am delighted. The whole point of this podcast, for me anyway, is connecting with people who fascinate and inspire me with their creativity. So it's hard for me to think of anything that could be more aptly described as delightful than getting to delve deep into conversations about the process of art making with these humans. So believe me when I say, once again, that I am delighted to be in conversation today with S. Elizabeth. S. Elizabeth is a writer, curator, and frill-seeker. Her essays and interviews about esoteric art have appeared in Coilhouse, Dirge Magazine, Death and the Maiden, as well as on her own occulture blog, Unquiet Things, which intersects music, fashion, horror, perfume, and grief. Born of the strange and fraught relationship between an astrologer and an artist, S. Elizabeth draws upon the magic in her blood and a lifelong passion for the visual arts to explore her obsessions through her writing. She is the co-creator of the Occult Activity Book Volumes 1 and 2, and is a staff writer at Haute Macabre. She lives in the Florida swamps with a Viking named Ývan and an imaginary corgi named Cheese Tray. Today, we chat about being the avenging angel of properly crediting supposedly anonymous artwork found online, why intros are the hardest part of the writing process, the arcane expectations of the publishing industry, being terrified of academics, reining in the tendency to be clever at the expense of kindness, and her Taurean ability to become more of herself while staying cozy at home. And now, my chat with S. Elizabeth. Excellent. Well, good morning, S. Elizabeth. Sarah, the author of The Art of the Occult. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited for this. I've really been looking forward to it.
Yay, me too. And yeah, we've been, not that the people need to know how the sausage is being made, but we have been trying to get this on the books for quite some time now. So it's like extra anticipation to make this really happen. So yeah, we've got a ton to talk about, namely the beautiful book, The Art of the Occult, a visual source book for the modern mystic that pubbed last October.
Yes, it was right before Halloween. It was initially scheduled for like September and it kept getting pushed back because of the pandemic. So it's it's a Scorpio or a Libra. I don't know. It's maybe right on the cusp, but it was right before Halloween.
Excellent. So yeah, so before we sort of launch into the whole saga of talking about the book itself, but yeah, would you like to sort of just introduce yourself and tell people who you are and what you do? And
Sure. I'm S. Elizabeth, although people call me Sarah. That's my name. S. Elizabeth is just what I write under on the internet. I am a blogger, a longtime blogger, a recently published author, and I write about art and occult, obviously, as well as grief and horror and magic and fashion and how all of these things intersect. And of course, I do have some other interests that maybe we'll get to talk about in this podcast, but that's basically what I'm all about.
And your main website is unquietthings.com, right?
Oh, yes, I'm terrible at marketing. Yes, you can find me at unquietthings.com. I still have a Tumblr, which I don't know if anyone does anymore, but I'm Ghoul Next Door over on Tumblr. I'm Crusty Old Mummy on TikTok.
Which I just scream every time I see that. It makes me so happy, Crusty Old Mummy.
And I'm Ghoul Next Door over on Instagram. So you can find me any of those places.
And I will be sure to put all those in the show notes when this gets posted. Yeah, so for my day job, I work in publishing, and have been a writer, much like you, my whole life. Always scribbling is something. And so, yeah, like talking words, talking books, talking editing is like my favorite thing to talk about. So like I am also very woo and love magic and, mysticism and all that stuff. So like I love the content of the book, but like I think contra a lot of the interviews that you've done, which have been more focused on like the artwork and sort of the philosophies that are underpinning some of them, I'm going to put all that to the side temporarily and really want to chat through what the process was like for you of assembling this book, because it's really, really a gorgeous tome. If anyone has not seen it, I urge you to go pick up a copy, because it's really, really outstandingly beautiful. And we'd just love to hear how it all came to be. So like, is this a thing where you like wrote up a proposal for the publisher and sent it to them? Did they find you? I know that that's a thing that happens a lot of times with people who are very avid online these days.
Oh, well, it's interesting how it happened. It's interesting because like the month before this commissions editor contacted me, and this was like in February of 2019, I had written a blog post the month before about why I'm never going to be a published author and why I don't want to be a freelancer. I don't want to write for money. It's just, I felt like it would put this sense of expectation on me. And I have written for myself for so long, although I have written for other outlets and other venues, but that was not paid work. It was just because I love to write. They were all labors of love. And so I had just written this whole thing because someone had said to me, I don't understand why you're not getting paid for this or whatever. I'm like, well, these reasons. And then a month later, a commissions editor reached out to me, and I totally had to eat my words.
That's so funny.
I'd say, I always say I'm never going to do this, but you have to let me change my mind because it always will. And so this commission editor reached out to me, and they I'm not exactly sure how they found me. I'm assuming it's because of my writings over at Haute Macabre, where for the past the prior 2 years I had been doing artist profiles and artist interviews, and a lot of these artists have a focus on magical practices or esoteric beliefs, or if they didn't have these practices, they were at least inspired in part by them. And so a lot of the art and artists focused on this. And so I'm assuming she found me through that, or maybe some of my writing for the now defunct Dirge Magazine or Coilhouse or something. I'm not sure, but the idea, she reached out to me, she pitched to me. I like I said, I hadn't intended on writing a book, although I feel like this would be the book I written. I felt like it was tailor-made for me. I think it was the universe also smacking me in the face saying, what are you doing? It's time. And so, the specs for the book and the cover for the book, I mean, it was already in place.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they just needed somebody to write it. And I think they liked my voice. I don't think they wanted something overly academic. I think they wanted sort of an intro to these beliefs and practices and principles and the artists and artwork that, was informed and inspired by them. And I think they wanted this to be sort of to reach a wide swath of people. I think they wanted it to be relatable, and perhaps that they saw that in my writing. But it was interesting how that happened. And I'm someone who really likes structure. So the fact that a lot of this was already laid out, I mean, I of course had a lot of input in how the book was structured. It's not chronological really. It's more by topic or themes. There's the cosmos and practitioners, as opposed to, like starting in the Middle Ages and working forward or whatever.
Which is what I love about the book, that it is such a like jump in, look around, like, and I love the fact that even within the chapters, it's not chronological. It's like you'll have something super, super contemporary, like thrown right up against something from like the 15th century. And I find that so exciting. Like I love that like sort of non-organizational organization.
Yeah, and I get that that's probably not what some people might have been expecting. That might be not how some people like to intake and digest their information. But I really wanted it to be something that you could flip open, sort of like a divination, like bookomancy, like flip it open to any page and find something new, or say, oh, I'd never heard of this artist, let's spend some time researching them. I think that's really what drove my passion for the book, because I know when I find a new to me artist, I want to know everything about them. I want to see all of their other work. And that's another thing that was really important to me for this book. I spent so many years on Tumblr, which is such a dorky thing to say.
I love Tumblr. I think that's probably how I found you in the first place. Cause I was on there for a long, long time and haven't visited, and I feel sad that I've let it sort of fall away.
Well, I noticed on Tumblr, and it's really rampant all over the place, like on Pinterest or on Instagram, or like even older than that, like We Heart It, like image curating sites, where the users will just post up a picture without credit or sourcing or context or whatever. And so I really wanted to make sure that we did a super good job with, crediting and sourcing imagery. Although I don't know how you could publish a book like this and not include credit. I mean, that would be a terrible, terrible thing to put out into the world. But I just know how incensed I would get if I found an image on Tumblr and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing, I want to know who this is. Oh, well, too bad for you, because there's no information here. But honestly, one of my my favorite hate things to do, like out of spite, I will spend like hours like reverse image searching something just to say in my heart, ha ha ha, I got you, I know who that is now.
No, I've seen you do those posts, and they're genius, and they're so I think it's like a rectifying force. You're like an avenging angel for artist credit, like in the world, which I think is really important. Sort of like, because you have a pretty sizable following online, and just saying to people like, look, it's really important to credit these artists. And then also, not only proving that point, but then also saying, okay, this artwork here is the credit, and like saying like, here's this beautiful piece of art, and now you know who produced it.
And now you can find more. Now Right. They can hang in your home if you want. Now you can buy their stuff, as opposed to this artist. I mean, if they're a living artist, a contemporary artist, as opposed to their stuff being shared widely throughout the internet, but nobody knows who it is, so nobody can support them, which is so important.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of that kind of energy went into this book as well.
Well, and I think that it's sort of, it's, in talking about the like non-chronological aspect of it, I think that that's like the perfect intersection, the perfect Venn diagram of sort of your life as like an online person combined and sort of merged and transformed into book publishing, because it's like, that's what the internet is non-contextual, non-sourced, beautiful stuff that's very, very inspiring. But then you sort of took that ethos, which is like really cool, and like what is lovable about the internet, but then you just sort of shorted up and made it into like, no, this can be legitimate now. This can be legitimated and credited and sourced and can live as a permanent object out in the world.
I love the way how you phrased that. That might have been subconsciously, that might have been floating around in my brain, but I don't think I would have ever summed it up like that. And so I love that. Thank you.
Please use it. Then you don't even have to source me.
I totally will.
So tell me more about then, like so the book was sort of in place. And so then how much of it did you, you said that you sort of brought a lot of the artists and stuff to it and the way that it was arranged. So then did you have to like write a more formal proposal to sort of like tell them, this is how I intend to, approach this book project? Or was it sort of just like, okay, you're in, let's like sign a contract and get you started on it?
It was more of the latter rather than
wow.
the former, which really surprised me, because in the past, in the prior 6 months to that, I had a friend who was contacted by a publisher and said, I'd love it if you could write a book about X subject matter. Let's put together a proposal. So my friend did put a lot of work into this. And the commissions editor took it to the marketing team, who shot it down. And so I was terrified that I was going to, put all this thought and this work into something that ultimately wasn't, going to be. And I'm like, why would you have reached out to me in the first place? But that was actually already in place. I think she came up with the title, even the cover, the specs for it, and it was already approved. They needed someone to do all the work for it and find the art for it. When she reached out to me, she had the blurb for the back of the book already written.
Wow.
Which of course was subject to change depending on my image research and what we came up with, but that was sort of already in place. So I kind of had some ideas to work from. And she had showed me a mood board. She had maybe 10 or 12 images that she had in mind. And part of them checking me out, although I had already signed a contract by this time, but was to send them an image list of 200 or 300 ideas, which is a lot.
Yeah, that's a ton.
And I would say half of them were shot down right off the bat for being too illustrative. I guess maybe being too, I'm still not sure what they meant by that. I just kind of it was trial and error to get to the sweet spot of what they might be looking for, but still be able to include things that really excited me. Mm-hmm. And so, it was a lot of research at the beginning, which continued along the way because, and maybe this is something we'll get into in a little bit, but, many of the images that we had both agreed on, we couldn't get for whatever reason, right, because of image permissions issues. So the image research was an ongoing process from beginning to end. And honestly, I loved it because I hadn't had much experience reaching out to artists to say, hey, let me use your work. But over the years, while I was maybe trying to source some uncredited image for, Tumblr or whatever, I didn't just stop at Google reverse image search or 10i or whatever there's 4 or 5 of them that I use, honestly. If I wasn't sure, if I ended up on an artist's site and this looked like their work, but I couldn't find this exact image, I would send an email to the artist and say, hey, I recently stumbled on your work and I love it. And I found this image uncredited. Is this yours? And so I was kind of used to reaching out to artists anyway. And also for the artist interviews that I had done, I used to sort of communicating them on an introductory level and trying to get them on board with whatever I'm doing. So, that I actually had a lot of fun with the image research. And I think maybe some people might find that a little, if not daunting, tedious, but I really enjoyed it.
That could be a whole second career if you wanted to ever do that. Cause I know that there's so many artists, who are doing compilation interview books and stuff like that, or heavily image sorts things that, that's where they hit a snag. Cause, from the publisher's perspective, we get a lot of that where it's the author will say oh yeah, I'm going to include all these pieces and I want to reproduce them. And we'll say okay, well, do you have permission to reproduce them? And they're oh, I'll take care of it. And then it's a week before the book is going to print. We're do we have to pull this whole 50-page chunk out of here because we didn't get permission? So did you have anything like that where you had to pull at the 11th hour because you couldn't track it down?
I feel like there were a couple of images. One in particular kind of breaks my heart. I think it was an image by Rosaline Norton. And I get a lot of people saying, oh, why didn't you include Rosaline Norton? And I'm oh, come on, people. Do you really think I didn't think to include this amazing artist? But I think what the issue is we couldn't get a high enough resolution of the image. And so we had to go with something else. But I think that was really the only one. There was, one or two artists that when I initially reached out to them, they're like, yeah, sure. But then when I followed up to say, well, can we have the image? I never heard back from them. So that, that's fine. I think I love everything that ended up in the book. And, if it didn't, it wasn't meant to be. So that's fine. I don't have any, I'm not mad at these people or anything. These are people with their own things going on, and maybe they change their mind, or whatever. It doesn't matter. If it didn't end up in there, well, then whatever. There's a lot of stuff in there that's amazing. Everything in there is amazing, so that's fine. It worked out.
So as since this is such an image heavy book, like what was the writing process like? I mean, were you doing the writing concurrent with doing the image sourcing, or did you sort of like try to lock down all the images before you did the writing, or how did those fit together?
I sort of concurrently, like you said, because a lot of the images inspired the writing.
Mm-hmm.
But so I would have maybe a chunk of 5 or 6 images to start with. I will say that I'm currently working on book number 2.
Yay!
And I'm doing it a little bit differently. Like right now, I am getting as many images as I can, because it's just easier for me to come up with a descriptive language or find an angle or some connections if there's just a lot of imagery to sort of pour over and see what takes my fancy. And I didn't do that so much the first time around. I did have a lot of ideas and images that I was working with, and a lot of times I would find something where I might have been having trouble. I think maybe the chapter on astrology, I couldn't figure out how I wanted to talk about it or how I wanted to start it. And then I found this amazing work by, I believe the guy's name was Abby Warburg. And oh God, no, it's completely slipped my mind what exactly this was, but it was just some fantastical mapping of time and memory and experience, and how this related to like the stars and astrology and astrological time. I'm like, well, this is fantastic. Or for example, the imagery or the chapter on the elements. And again, I'm like, well, how can I get into this? Where's my angle to get started? I found an interview with Laura Esquivel. I think she's the author who wrote like Water for Chocolate. In the interview, which was not at all related to this, but she was talking about how she had a little altar where she brought in elements for earth, water, fire, and air. And I'm like, that's a really interesting place to start from. I'm going to include that. So, the art might not necessarily dictate what I'm going to write about, but it takes me in the research, it takes me to interesting places where I can just make all sorts of connections. And I think that's the most fun part about writing, period. Making these light bulb moments. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Let's bring that in. That's relatable, or that's beautiful, or and that's why I love to write. I think those little moments, but that's not exactly what you ask. I'm getting off track.
No, but I was just gonna say though that like that's part of what I mean, again, there's so much to love about the book, but like I love how it is. I mean, it's not like they commissioned you and you sort of like erased your personality just to give them something that they could publish. It's like this is fully your writing and your sensibility and your way of sort of describing things, because again, in that sort of Tumblr-y vein, it's like some of the descriptions are just kind of like very factual. It's like, here's who this artist is, and here's what they did, and here's when they lived, and this is what their focus was. And then some of them, you got jokes, lady. Like there's like really, really funny descriptions. And I was like, oh, I love that you were just able to marry those sensibilities like in the context of the book. And again, it feels so you. So again, it cracks me up that it didn't start life as something that you originated.
And it's funny that you say that, because this is my first published book, so I'm used to writing for myself. I'm not used to being edited. At first I really resented it, which that sounds really ungrateful. But a friend said to me, I had mentioned to them, oh, I just got, some chapter back and it's all marked up. And he said, oh yeah, it's the worst when they offer you helpful advice, isn't it? I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Let's reframe how I'm thinking about this, because every suggestion my editor made for me, it tremendously improved what I was working on. So I really had to rethink how I was coming at that. And now I'm actually finding myself looking forward to feedback. But one of the things, to get back to your question, is as I was first writing this, I wasn't sure how much of myself and my own perspective I could put into this. And so I would get some feedback. Well, no, you can't do it that way. You can't say I, me. I'm like, well, okay, how can I insert myself more fully into the book without doing this? And there's one thing in there that I am so surprised that I got away with. And it's in the chapter on alchemy. And it's actually one of my favorite images in the book, although it's kind of a grotty, grimy image and you can't really make out what's going on a lot. But there's this jumble of toppled copper pots and this murky atmosphere. And there's a little cat in the middle, like, fuck this thing in particular. I wrote that in there and they kept it.
They kept it. That's so awesome. I remember flipping past that and I was like, nicely done. Like, that's so great.
So yeah, I mean, little instances like that, or I mean, I try to keep it because I think there's people who won't necessarily appreciate that. And 10 years from now, people might look at that and say, is that supposed to be funny? I don't get it. So I tried not to do that too much.
Sure.
But where I could, I made it happen.
So, I mean, since you were, again, like, doing these things together, the image searching and the writing, like, was there ever a point where you turned in just like, here's the manuscript, here it is done? Or were you turning things in sort of piecemeal, like chapter by chapter?
The way it worked for me, I don't know about other writers, especially, I mean, if you're working on like a work of fiction or maybe nonfiction that's not heavily image-based, but what I had a schedule where, like, once a month I was to send in the images for like 3 chapters, because I believe it was 4 parts to the book, 3 chapters each. And so I would be sending in the images for 1 part, which would be 3 chapters. And that's how it was laid out in my contract. But what I did instead, and I cleared this with my editor, is because I had a deadline scheduled at the end where I would be turning in all the text. And I'm like, if I do it that way, then I know I'm going to wait. I'm like, I think what I'll do instead is write up the text for each of these parts and send it in with the images. And so that's what I ended up doing. And so I'd send that in and then I'd start to work on the next part, but then I'd get feedback, so I kind of worked on the feedback and the next part concurrently. And then, at the final deadline, it was like the final deadline on paper, which I understand that a little bit better now. That's when I turned in all my image ideas, all my text for the book. And then they came back to me and said, okay, well, here's your image research partner. And they're going to reach out to museums and galleries, and they're going to source these images from, those type of places. And, here are like 50 or 100 contemporary artists that we would like you to reach out to. So, and that came sort of after all of the text. And then once we were pretty far along in that, they came back to me and would say, oh, we need a few more images for this chapter. The layout designer, is finding that this isn't kind of quite going to work this way, or we need some more intro text or things like that. It was things that I wasn't thinking of. Like, as I was writing up all these chapters, it didn't occur to me that I have to write like an intro for the book.
Sure.
Intros, I mean, having been writing, like interviews or artist profiles or whatever for so long, intros are the hardest parts. So that I found a little bit daunting. This time around on this particular book, every time I have an idea for the intro, I'm writing it down.
Nice.
So I'm kind of taking what I learned in my problem areas from that first experience, and I'm trying to do better to make maybe even a better book, but just to make my life easier as I do this one.
The first book project is always such a trial by fire. I mean, my husband is a published author and academic, and is same thing. His second book, which was an edited collection that he co-edited with a colleague of his. But yeah, it just came out. And so the whole way through the process, he's like, okay, well, I learned this the first time on the first one, and I want to do it differently this time. And because you don't know, it's like anything else that you've never done before. And the publishing industry can be so arcane in its expectations. And people who work in publishing, it's like, that's literally what they do every day. And so I think it's like, sometimes hard for people to remember, like this author might not know, not only what our unique procedure is, but just sort of like what book procedure is in general. And so sometimes there's even like a sort of communication barrier between editorial and authors, because it's like, what do you need me to do? Like those expectations, sometimes are not explicit until it's like way after the fact.
Oh, you're right. I mean, when you're starting out, you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know what to ask, or you don't know what you shouldn't be doing in order to not do it. So right. there was a bit of a learning curve, but I'm really grateful for that after the fact. During the time, it was a little bit mortifying.
Yeah.
But after the fact, yeah, I'm really grateful to have had that experience and to have those small little, I don't know, screw ups along the way, because I won't do that again. So that's, it's good to have that under your belt.
And that's awesome that they gave you a research partner. That's super cool. Like to just ease some of the burden of doing all that research. I mean, because again, for such an image heavy book, like I can't imagine like how long that would have taken to do it all yourself.
Yeah. And also because I think this publisher, they do lots, well, not lots, but they have a category, a section on their website just for art books. So they've got people on staff who this is what they do. And so they have image databases that they know to automatically go to see if, this is public domain image or whatever. Whereas I would have no idea. Oh, I found it on Tumblr. Well, that's
right. That doesn't fly. Yeah.
So yeah, it's very helpful that these people work alongside you for sure.
What a luxury. That's amazing. Like, I'm kind of like, do we have a budget to hire someone to do that at our company? So how long did it take front to back then? I mean, from the moment when you signed the contract to when, it was going off to the printer, like how long was that process?
Not a lot of time. If this were a book that were more academic in nature, there was more in the way of scholarship within the pages, I would hope they would give you a lot more time for it. But on paper, I got started like March 2019, and the last deadline, like for the text and the images before the image research started, was October 2019. So wow. March to October. That's
really fast, especially when you weren't planning on doing this book, when it wasn't your idea in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and if you do this all day long, I mean, if this is your full-time job, that might seem like a reasonable amount of time. But if you don't, if you already work a full-time job, and, I think of the people who work 2 or 3 jobs, how would they do this? And, this is not to, I'm not complaining. I don't want it to be, I don't mean it as a complaint, but it's not a lot of time to work within.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially like, that was a big thing that I wanted to talk to you about was, how you fit this around a day job, because, Yeah, it's a thing, for people, because it's like on social media and stuff, I see people complaining about like, oh, I got this paltry advance and it's not enough to live on while I write this book. People who don't have a full-time gig, and it's six of one, half dozen of the other. It's like, yeah, you might have the luxury of time, but then you're freaking out about the money. Whereas on the opposite side, it's like, yeah, if you have a stable job, to like allow your writing to like truly be a hobby, even if it is something you're doing more or less professionally. But then you're scrambling for the time to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I work a full-time job. This is the same job I've had since like 2007. I mean, I'm lucky, especially during the pandemic. I am lucky to have had a job. So, I don't want to, I don't want to complain, but this is, I don't think of it as a career even. It's a thing I do to make money so that I can do the things I really want to do. Sure. Right.
Yeah.
That said, I think I'm good at my job. I'm dedicated and I put my all into it. And so I'm working from like 8 a.m. to like 6 p.m. And I, worked at home long before the pandemic. So luckily I'm already in an environment where during my lunch, if I have a few minutes, I can write down some ideas or do a little bit of research, or, I get to my desk early in the morning. I am an early riser. I won't say that I'm up writing at 5 o'clock in the morning, but, I'll wake up and I'll get my morning walk and I'll have coffee and do a bit of reading, and I'll get to my desk maybe an hour ahead of time. And so I fit it in where I can, in the morning, at lunch, and then at the end of the day, I'll spend a couple hours at my desk. And again, the first time around, I think I was just so paralyzed at the idea of writing this book. And as a writer, I think we all know the hardest thing to do is just start. And so, I mean, a whole week or two would go by without me even opening up a document because I was just so terrified. And this time around, I'm like, you know what? You open it up, you write for 5 minutes, which we all know turns into like 15 or 20 or an hour. I mean, that's just how it works. And so you're just chipping away at it a little bit every day. And I'm finding this time around, I don't have that same sense of extreme terror.
Because what was the terror then? Was just like, I'm going to do it wrong, or I don't know what to say, or?
I think it's that. And I feel like such a weenie, confessing to something like this, but I'm terrified of academics. I know what the scope of this was, and it really wasn't meant for people with that academic scholarship under their belt. This some introductory material, but I think I was terrified that someone was going to look at it and say, oh, this is, or just dismiss it, just be very dismissive of it. Or I think I was a little bit afraid that despite of however much research I might have been doing and however much fact checking they might have been doing on the back end, that maybe I got some piece of information wrong and that I would be crucified for it on the internet, because that's how the internet works. Yeah. And so I was afraid of instances like that, or, bad reviews, I read a few reviews that are really nice. And then I read a review that said, oh, Sarah's no James Wasserman. I'm like, well, I really wasn't trying to write from that angle, but okay. And so at this point, I'm like, whatever. It doesn't paralyze me the way that it did. And I'm like, people are going to write what they're going to write. They're going to like it or not. Write the book that I want to write, and then I'll be happy with it.
That's amazing that you've been able to get to that place. Cause it's like, it's funny. Like I write a ton, and I'm very much in a similar position to you, where it's like, I've always, I don't want to be paid for my writing, because it's like, I don't want to have to depend on it, for my livelihood. I want it to be something that is joyful. But yeah, I get very scared. Same thing, that it's like, even if I'm writing about myself, it's like, am I going to say something here that's going to be so called out, or whatever, which has never happened. But I could imagine myself in that situation. And like after the first one,
re-entrenching into that fear and having the second one be harder. So I'm very happy on your behalf to hear that the second one has been going smoothly for you.
Yeah, it really has. I haven't been talking about it much because I'm not even sure that my editor came back to me after The Art of the Occult and said, I've been reading your blog, which that in and of itself is pretty flattering. But she said, I have an idea that, I think we could do another art book. And I'm paraphrasing. She didn't exactly say it like this, but she pitched it to me with a particular title that I just loved. And so I gave her a bunch of ideas. And again, she wrote up the pitch. And pitched it to the marketing team. And they're like, okay, this is great, but we don't like the title. I'm like, oh, it's such a good title. And so I don't really love the title as it is now. We'll just say that this is another art book. It has to do with the art of the macabre, dark art, and the themes and the artists who contributed to this type of art. And so this is even more up my alley than the other one. But the title was going to be The Art of Darkness, which I just loved so much, but they thought it was a little bit too vague. But then I also thought, well, what if someone accidentally, they're looking for the heart of darkness and then they get I mean, that's good too.
Yeah. Use that accident in your favor. Yeah.
And I feel like, I don't know. I just felt like it was sort of I love it because it's so evocative and you don't know exactly what you're getting in for, but you're intrigued enough to find out. But I think they just don't think it's specific enough. So the title is still up in the air, but that's what I'm working on right now. And like I said, I'm not really talking about it a lot because in spite of, I don't want to say the success of the first book, who's to say if it's successful, but despite the fact that it exists, which is pretty great, I don't want to jinx myself. I'm a little bit superstitious. So I really don't want to talk too much about that. And I'm saying that like you brought it up. No, you didn't. I realize that. But just until it's a little bit more concrete, maybe until like there's an actual book in the world. So I'll be probably talking about that much later in the summer or maybe even in the fall.
Well, and nobody's going to stop you from saying The Art of Darkness in your own promotional clips about it. You can steal that back.
Maybe I will do that.
So yeah, what kind of edits did you get? I mean, you said that you were sort of terrified, and you got a lot of, red lines that looked really scary when you first got them. So was it just sort of like grammar style? You mentioned like a lot of the first person stuff. Was it house style? Like how deep was that?
I recall initially looking at, a batch of edits and feedback that I got and thinking that it was just insurmountable to figure out how to, but it wasn't like, a fiction story. I follow writer Twitter a lot. And so there's a lot of writers talking about how they get edits back from their author, their publishers or their editors, say, you need to rework this plot or this character wouldn't do this. I didn't really have to deal with anything like that. It was more like, as you said, and as I mentioned, you need to back out and take yourself out of this. But it was also like, give a more concrete example of X, Y, or Z, or how can we bring this art movement in to act as a gateway to this concept or this principle, or you're too wordy, cut it down. And I mean, of course, they didn't say that, but there were a lot of instances where they tightened my senses, and I am kind of wordy, and I realize that, and I haven't worked with editors to keep me in check. So I think it's only ballooned over the years. And I think I do have a tendency to resort to a lot of purple prose.
Well, but again, it's that meeting of internet writing and book writing, where it's like there's no word limits on the internet, unless they're self-imposed. You can go as long or short as you want to.
And that's another thing. There are, of course, word limits for the chapters and the captions. And so let's say I only had like 800 words to say in this introduction. I know a lot of reviewers would say, this was too short. I wish they would have written more about this. And I understand that feeling, as a reader, wishing that the author would have delved a little bit more into this artist and their experiences and whatnot. And now, as having written this, I understand that you have limits and boundaries and criteria that you have to work within. And so you can't always share as much as you might like. As a matter of fact, 3 books worth of research might be condensed into 2 sentences.
Right.
And so, but at the same time, I'm trying to look at feedback like that and think, well, how could you have gotten more information into those 3 sentences? There is one reviewer who wrote, and I have to laugh because I have said this about writers too. I have never read so many words that say nothing. I'm like, oh. Well, maybe I have a tendency to do that too. So how can I, bring more relevant information to a reader's experience and perhaps be less descriptive and lyrical and poetic, although that's where I tend to want to go. So I'm trying to look at things that I might have gotten a little bit butthurt about and try to learn from them and say, maybe they're not saying this to hurt me personally. Maybe they did want some more real concrete information, and how can I be better about that?
Well, and this is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation, because I think that I don't think it's a conscious antagonism, but I think that there can be an antagonism between reviewers, readers, bloggers, authors, publishers, marketing people, publicists, where everyone's coming in with their own agendas, and somehow it's got to coalesce into or around this one singular object. And I think that it can be hard for, like you said, readers, who are disappointed that an artist doesn't appear in the book, or something, is not elaborated on in a specific way that they were expecting. And, obviously that's a whole internet thing too, that sort of why doesn't this cater exactly to my 100% interests, which it's never going to. But I think that, just talking through the multiple forces at play, is really interesting. I mean, for book people and for prospective authors and for reviewers, that there are extraneous forces at play that are going to change the way that a book appears. And it's not always out of ignorance or out of willful antagonism, that there's limits to page counts, there's limits to what you can get permission to reproduce and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you bring up another interesting point that's somewhat relevant, I suppose, to what we're talking about. What it sort of sparks in me that I want to say, I guess, is somewhat relevant. That these reviewers aren't necessarily being antagonistic. It makes me think of how I write reviews, because I do a lot of book reviews too, just for my own blog. But I've really had to rein in over the years my tendency to try and be clever at the expense of kindness. And so I might be thinking that I'm writing something witty about something, the particular book, but it's really disparaging and dismissive. And, the more time I spend on the internet, the more I realize these authors are reading this. And so I'm trying to take that perspective, not just for reviews, but for everything I write. And so I guess it says something about my secret heart that this is where I tend to want to go in my writing. I want to make people laugh. I also want to make people cry, which is a kind of mean and horrible too, but it's a mean and horrible. It's bringing catharsis to people. That's a nice way to put it. I'm trying to reconcile myself with this. How can I make this witty or funny without, but not at the expense of someone else? And I don't know for sure if that even showed up in any way in the art of the occult, but even writing about, art on the canvas, sometimes I'm tempted to go to that place. And it's like, I think that's going to alienate more people than it's going to bring in and maybe give them a giggle, but if they think about it later, they might say that was kind of shitty. And I don't want to be that kind of writer. So that's something that I work with, and with regard to writing and reviews and so on.
Well, and that's fantastic, because that was something that I was curious about, if the project of working on the book has changed the way that you write online, or how you think about writing online. And I think you just asked that question, or answered that question, before I even asked it.
And it has. And another thing is, when I was writing this book, that book and this book, and I don't know where to start, and maybe the images aren't speaking to me, and maybe I haven't been getting ideas. I'll often start from a place like, if you were just writing for your blog, it was just you reading this, what would you say? And that has helped me more often than not, because at least I get something on the page. Right. And then I can go through it and say, well, Sarah, you're the only person who knows what this means. So let's change this part. But yeah, I don't know if that's changed how I write, but I think that's made more concrete the way that I write. And I was thinking about something the other day. I had a sophomore English teacher, and I didn't think too much about it at the time, but we had a poetry course, and he liked my poem, and he sent me to some, I don't know, outside of the school day thing with writers at a local community college. And I was thinking about the thing I wrote, which I thought was just kind of dumb and silly at the time, but it was very true and very vulnerable. And as I get older and as I write more, I'm just trying to do that a lot more in my writing. And not to just, well, yes, to relate to people and to connect with people, because I'm shy. I'm not a people person. I mean, that's an understatement. And so my writing is how I connect with people. And getting back to, being clever at the expense of kindness, I'm really trying to rein that in, but I'm also trying to be as true and vulnerable as I can in my writing. And The Art of the Occult, I don't know if that's something you get in there. I mean, because it's not really that kind of book. I think that might come more into play into what I'm writing now, because a lot of these themes in this dark art has to do with pain and loss and grief. And again, I don't know how much I'll be able to insert myself into this book, probably not much, but I think it is a place to channel that vulnerability. And so I'm excited to do that. And hopefully it'll make a lot of people cry.
Yes, I will let you know. I will collect the waterworks as I read it. Well, this is probably a totally unfair question, but what are your favorite pieces in the book? Do you have favorite pieces of writing? Do you have favorite sections, favorite pieces of artwork, or not? I mean, they can all be your babies.
I do actually have a few favorites. One of them I got into a little bit earlier. It was that murky alchemical painting with the cat. I love all of the art in the alchemical chapters because I hyperfixate on details. So the glistening glass and the smoking fires and the bubbling beakers, I could just gaze on those forever. And there's 2 pages in the book. They're side by side. There's the fuck this thing in particular murky painting. And then on the other side, it's this painting of this gentleman in velvet, and there's tapestries on the walls, and he's holding out some alchemical concoction to perhaps a customer, and it's ordered and opulent and just the exact opposite of what's on the other page. And I didn't do that, I don't think. I mean, in the images that I might have sent to the editor, they might have been side by side, but it wasn't subconscious. But the layout designer put them on opposite each other. And it's so perfect. And I love it so much. And of course, there's Remedios Varo, who was associated, although I don't think a lot of women surrealists at that time really liked to associate with the surrealists because of, misogyny and feminist issues and all of that. But she associated and exhibited with the surrealists in Paris, I believe, after she fled Spain during the Spanish War, and then she settled in Mexico during World War II, and that's where she met with Leonora Carrington, and they had this beautiful mystical friendship. But I love her haunting, hazy, fantastical artworks, with their female protagonists that are just these mythical beings interacting with these strange creatures and these kind of weird machines. And I love her work so much. And she was a kooky writer too. I have a book of her letters and her dreams, and it's so much fun. I think she died relatively young, like in her 50s, maybe. I think, there's not many artists or celebrities I say I'd like to meet because I'm so shy. I can admire your work from afar. I don't need to meet you, but I would actually love to have met her. And then there are two contemporary artists in the book that I just adore. There's Carrie-Anne Bada, whose work is informed, I think, by art history and lost aesthetics. And her works are these sort of Frankensteinian pieces that are deeply layered and just brimming with symbolism and myth. And then Susan Jameson, whose works are just lush and luminous and steeped in like sacred feminine energies and fanciful, whimsical ritual, I guess you could say. And so I love both of their bodies of work. And I mean, so many of the contemporary artists I adore, like Mark Ryden.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I guess you would call him a pop surrealist, a contemporary pop surrealist, maybe. I was so surprised that I was able to include his, I think it's Allegory of the Four Elements. It's in the elemental chapter. And these four adorable little girls in a forest setting with some alchemical symbology, studded throughout the canvas. And I was so surprised that we were able to get permission to use that. So thank you, Mark Ryden, if you're ever this. But yeah, there's so many pieces in the book that I love, but those are some off the top of my head that I really adore.
Yeah. And I was, speaking of Leonora Carrington and Remedios Varo, like the fact that you have so many women, it's like, of course you do. But it's, I was so happy to see the Marjorie Cameron pieces that you had, because I had read so much about her, like in reading about, Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard and everything. And so to actually get to see her art and not just see her discussed as sort of this like, elemental woman who was summoned from the desert or whatever, the way that she's normally talked about in occult writing, to see her work, I was like, oh, thank you. Like, thank you for showing her actual artwork.
She was another one that I was very excited to have been able to include. Excuse me. I would have, another one that I didn't think that I might get to include is Valley Myers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So if I could have had Rosaline Norton too, I feel all my dreams could have come true. With that, these were all in the same chapter, the practitioners chapter. But yeah, these were just, the whole thing was a dream come true, but especially to, like you said, include Marjorie Cameron and then Valley Myers and these just visionary artists, these visionary female artists. It was amazing.
So is that sort of an instance of book magic? It's like everyone that I know who's written a book has had instances of book magic, where they're trying to achieve something and then, something falls into place, whether it's like finding the right book to get the right quote out of, or finding, connecting with someone who knew the person being written about, where things just start to fall into place. Was getting those permissions some of your book magic, or was there other things that occurred sort of around the edges for you?
Getting those permissions, especially the Valley Myers one, because we were having a hard time getting a Valley Myers piece, and I'm still not sure how the image research person secured that, but I'm grateful that they did. And then the other two things that I mentioned with the writing, the Abby Warburg astrological map, and then the Laura Esquivel altar in the interview. And then the contemporary artist that I mentioned, Carrie-Anne Bada, she's in the Higher Beings chapter. It's a piece called Artemis. And this was not initially a piece that I had sent to my editor, but we needed another piece of artwork for that chapter. And so I was doing some more image research, and I found this. I'm like, how did I not discover this before? And so I submitted it and they were okay with it. And Carrie Ann gave the permissions. And then I'm like, wait a second, I actually know who this is. I have featured this person on my blog before. As a matter of fact, you're familiar with Pam Grossman of Waking.
Yeah.
She had done a portrait of Pam Grossman that I used for a piece that I had done on Pam Grossman. And I'm like, how did I not realize this was the same person?
Oh my gosh. I
was so happy to have included her in my book. And I just think, well, what if I didn't need that extra image? What if but that's not what happened. And I did, and it all fell into place. So that's definitely a piece of book magic.
That was huge book magic. Well, and the other book magic thing is sort of the external part that came together is the BPAL collaboration. Like that to me is huge magic, because I think that's one of the first plays that I connected with your writing was your writing about perfume. And so, yeah, the Black Phoenix Alchemy Lab scents that got put together. I would just love to hear you talk through the process of having those scents come into the world.
Well, never in my wildest dreams would I have expected that or even reached out to them, although I do work with them quite closely. I wouldn't have presumed. So this was published, and their marketing person, he's much more than a marketing person. He does a lot of work for them, or they do a lot of work for them. This is Tom, and they said, can I give you a call? And I'm like, do I have to get on the phone for this? But I really adore Tom. So anytime he would say something like this, I would of course say yes. And so Tom called me, and I guess maybe this was their idea. It wasn't my idea. Oh. And so I was so excited, and I didn't get really any input into the scents themselves because it happened so quickly. They wanted to get them out and available, I think, by the time I was announcing that the book was released. And so, but I trust Beth implicitly, and she is a scent wizard. Whatever she wants to do is going to be amazing. And so they asked me to choose 5 artworks. And of course, they have to be careful with this label art. It's got to be things that are in the public domain. Otherwise, I might choose some more contemporary favorites, but of course I've got a lot of older, beloved works that are in the book.
I'm wearing the Strega today, by the way. I made sure to put this on in order for our interview to be properly infused with this energy.
I think that's a favorite amongst the BPAL fans. But yeah, so they came up, or Beth put the scents together. I wrote up some little scent or art memories to go along with the scent descriptions. For example, the Hilma of Clint piece, I think it's like altar piece number 1, group 10. It's the kaleidoscopic pyramid.
It's art that's on the cover of the book.
Yeah, the cover art. I had gone to the Hilma of Clint exhibit at I think it was at the Guggenheim.
Oh, jelly! I'm so jelly. That's cool.
Yeah, my partner and I, we had traveled up to New York with his family, and his mother was actually the one who wanted to see it.
Wow.
At the same time, and she was expecting, I think she had seen like some landscapes or something that Hilma of Clint had done very early in her schooling. And so I don't think she was aware of the mystical, spiritual pieces of art, the enormous pieces of art. I mean, some of these things were massive. They were just amazing, breathtaking to see in person. But also at the same time was a Robert Mapplethorpe exhibit.
Oh, yeah.
And so his mother wandered into that.
Oh no.
This little Icelandic woman, and she comes out and she was just scandalous. That's part of my memories of that day. It was a lot of fun.
That is so funny.
But yeah, this was such a tremendous opportunity. One of my friends on Facebook said to me when I made this announcement about the collaboration between the book and the scents inspired by the book, she said, well, you must feel like you've peaked now. And I don't think she meant it as snarky as that might sound. But yeah, actually I did. If I'm being honest, the scents were even more exciting than the book because I have been such a long time fan of Black Phoenix Alchemy Lab. I mean, I think they opened their doors in 2002 and I found them in 2004. So I've kind of been, although not, close with them, but I have been along for the ride since, I don't know, that's a lot of math, however many years that is.
Yeah. I mean, and talk about like book magic. Again, this is, I sort of feel like this is like you really bringing, your interests and your love into the world. I mean, like, as far as like I was making the comparison between like, this perfect marriage of blogging and then publishing and how they combined in the book. But then this was this extra component where, because it's like perfume is like such a huge part of your life, and Black Phoenix Alchemy Lab specifically is such a huge part of your life. And so I just think it's like, I don't know, I think that's down to you just being a magical being, being able to like inspire these other magical beings to sort of like your antennas like met up like little snails meeting in the garden or something. And everyone just became this like Voltron of love and magic, just making these sense. So I think that's just incredible. What an experience.
I love that because I'm a Taurus. So I think of myself as a very kind of earthy person, very hands-on and practical. And so I see these authors that are very cerebral and ethereal and, with their rituals and their practices. And I'm like, well, I just go into the kitchen and do some kitchen witchery, right? Or out in the garden. So I feel sometimes I'm outside of the magical community looking in because my own practices are just so mundane. And that I'm happy with that, really. I'm not a ritualistic person, really. And I'm certainly not a community oriented. I'm not going to get together with my coven and do some sort of whatever thing because I don't really like getting together with people. so that's not me. And so I often feel outside of all of that. But for you to say that this sort of magical meeting of the minds, that makes me very happy. Thank you.
Well, and I think that, yeah, Taurean sensuality magic gets sort of short shrift. I mean, I think that a lot of times, magical practitioners, it does, the perception really is like books, words, incantations, things like that. And I think that the physicality of magic needs more attention. And I think that that's something that you, as a Taurus, and just, your sort of sensibility in general, yeah, I think you undersell it. I think you underplay it, and saying like, oh, I just kitchen witch or, oh, I just plant witch. But those are hugely powerful magics to bring into the world. And I think that that's, part of, your force for good, is that like you might feel solitary in doing it. But I think that those energetic tendrils that come from those practices, I think have a bigger reach than you might realize. Because I think it's really important to physicalize magic in a way that sometimes people don't necessarily think of it. And it's not sexy, but I think that's what's powerful about it, is that it, it's sensual instead of sexual, or sexual too, I guess, depending on how, what kind of magic you're working with. But, yeah, no, I think that's like hugely important. So I'm glad to hear you talk about that, because I think that that's something, especially like after this pandemic year, I think people are finally kind of waking up to is what is the magic of your local life and of the ways that you just sort of move through the world. Because it's like, can it really be magic if it's separate from your daily life,
That is a great point. And you're right. I do tend to, I think, undersell myself everywhere in my life. And I don't know why that is. That's for therapy. I mean, but yeah, you're right. As I didn't go out a lot before the pandemic. I am a homebody, but I did go out a little bit. And so being at home, just me and my partner, I have really found myself become more of myself. And I'm posting on Instagram all the time, my projects in the kitchen, which, I think if you're following me on Instagram, it's probably because of books or perfume. And I lose a lot of followers when I post about my culinary experimentation.
What? How can that be true? I love when you talk about your soups, your little beanie soups and your bread and stuff.
I don't know. I mean, and that's the thing that I see with a lot of, this is getting into another topic entirely, but I wrote for Haute Macabre. And so I got a lot of goth followers. And I think goth people like to present like they don't eat or they don't have bodily functions. I'm like, everybody's got to eat, people. And so you know what I mean? Not eat people. But
that too.
So I think, a lot of people show up on my Instagram looking for goth content, which I'm not really goth. I maybe have a secret goth heart, but it's like got a Holly hobby exterior. And so, so people are looking for, horror stories or spooky perfumes or jewelry. And then I post my salmon or my bean soup and everybody flees. But that's what really excites me, spending time in the kitchen, cooking up things for the people I love. And what better magic is there than that? That's my personal opinion.
Well, I think that is a beautiful place to start to close this out. I think that is an amazing sentiment. And so thank you so much for sharing these ideas and sharing all the nitty-gritty details about how books get made. Because again, it's talk about alchemical magic that is truly, something that arises out of different streams of raw material that becomes this magical object in the long run. So thank you for talking us through how that all came together for the art of the occult, and also the book to come that we will be looking forward to hopefully soon.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Is there anything that you would like to tell people where to find you? Again, your various addresses or other things that you have coming up in the future that you'd like people to know about?
Okay, well, my blog is unquietthings.com, and that's where I'm writing about, art and fashion and music and dreams and all that sort of thing. Whatever crosses my mind, it goes on my blog. I'm on Twitter at Mademoiselle Ghoul. That's MLLEGHOUL. I am on Instagram, Ghoul Next Door. I'm on TikTok with my Midnight Stinks perfume reviews. You can find me at Crusty Old Mummy. And where else am I? Oh yeah, I'm on Tumblr. I'm still on Tumblr, Ghoul Next Door.
And I will put all these things in the show notes so that people can click on over and more easily find you. So Sarah, thank you so much again. And thank you for bringing this beautiful book and these beautiful perfumes into the world. And thank you for spending time with me today.
Thank you for letting me babble about it.
So I think I comported myself fairly well in that conversation, but you must believe me when I say I was nerding out in my heart the whole time we were talking. Sarah is such an online rock star to me. I've been a fan of hers for ages at this point. From what I can tell, it looks like I was linking back to her writing on my own blog as early as 2015. And full disclosure, she very kindly let me contribute a post to her ongoing 10 Things series in December of 2019. But I just adore her writing voice, her dedication to blogging as its own art form, her overall aesthetic sensibility, and her wry sense of humor. Her post that was fixated on the cheese sandwich in the recent remake of Suspiria is a classic in my mind. But I think one of her signatures as a writer and thinker is just her extreme generosity in uplifting the various writers, musicians, and artists she admires. So it was truly an honor that I got to turn the tables a little bit and put her in the warm glow of the spotlight here today. So be sure to follow Sarah's exploits online on the platform of your choice, and don't miss her beautiful debut book, The Art of the Occult. You can find links to all Sarah's various online profiles over on my blog, queenofpeaches.com. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.